So, okay, today we have a controversial video. And it's controversial because I'm sure somebody in the comments is going to get mad at me for what I'm about to do. So here's the deal. This van, this is an old Honda Odyssey, which seems to run pretty good. It's got a couple of issues. We'll talk about that later. But one of the issues I've got right now is a crappy old battery. I guess I should cover up the brand name on it, although some of you may know where this battery came from. But anyways, it's a crummy old battery. It's a few years old, but really it came from 2021. I can see on the little yellow sticker down here. I guess I'll figure out how to blur stuff on my editing software. But anyway, I can see this is from 2021. I know that's a while for a battery to go, but I really like to see them go longer than that. Maybe I'm a little too greedy. But here's the controversy. I am going to convert this from top post. This is what's top post here, as some of you probably know. I'm going to convert it from top post to side post, where you just got one bolt that goes through like this. Now, a lot of people hate those side posts. And I really think that a lot of people hate side posts because back in the 70s and before, all you had was top post. And you probably can correct me on that. Sometime mid-70s or early 70s, the side post batteries started coming out. And they really got used popularly by General Motors vehicles. Now, a lot of people hate the side posts. Oh, you can't jump start them real easy. It's hard to get your jump starters on there. And it's like, well, you're putting jumper cables on your car every day. You got a whole other problem. But the other issue with these top posts is I find that they corrode really badly. And the side posts, they still absolutely will corrode, but not as bad as these top posts. The other problem is these complicated connections. These clamps always go bad, and you end up tightening them, and they end up like this ground clamp over here. I know it's a little dark in here, but you can see how that's almost squeezed all the way together. Well, eventually these get to where they squeeze all the way together, and they still don't tighten down. And then you get the situation what we got here. And this is something I had to learn the hard way myself. These are what's called an emergency clamp. See how this just clamps down on the end? And it's not crimped over the wire. And there's not really anything stopping, because you can see a little exposed wire there, and you can see exposed wire here. Now take a close look at that wire. It's not really copper colored anymore. It's kind of copper colored, but see how it's turning black or turning a darker color? That's corrosion. And what that will actually do is run up the length of the wire until finally you have to replace the whole wire. I've never seen it myself, but I've heard of people talking about stripping back wire casing and finding corrosion like a couple of feet back on the wire. Now, I don't know if I believe that, but even just an inch or two, basically you're making that last inch or so of that wire where it's not as conductive as it should be. And you run into these problems where you get your car and you go to start it, and it's on a hot day, and the car's hot, the battery's hot, the wires are hot, that's the key thing, and your starter just goes rrr, 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 and barely cranks over. You think you got a bad battery. You go buy a new battery, you put it in, car does the same thing. You think, well, I got a bad starter, or there's something inherently wrong with how this car was wired from the factory. No, what's happened is your wires to your battery have corroded or just gotten old. They do get old. And here's another problem. Sometimes the factory doesn't really crimp the wire right. That right there, yeah, that's still grounding, but odds are someday this thing isn't going to start, and that right there is going to be the reason why. And yet again, look at it. You can see how there's just a little bit of green there? That green is death. You should not see that on a wire. The other thing is the way this has been folded multiple times back and forth like that. Those strands are getting ready to break. That wire is not going to do its job grounding this vehicle out like it should. Now, is that an immediate problem? No, but eventually it's going to be an issue. And yet again, you're just going to be in a parking lot someday, your car won't start, and you change the battery, it still won't start. You might even take it to a shop, and a lot of shops won't even know that that's the problem. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to convert this to side post. I'm going to put proper connections on here that are actually shrunk tube onto the wire. And I'll show you there's some special shrink tubing you want to use around batteries. And we'll actually make this to where It removes easier because it's really hard to get at that nut because all this is in the way. And then we'll also make it to where it's more reliable because it'll have proper connections on it. Now, are top posts inherently wrong? No, they're not. A lot of people like them. But I'll tell you, I hate them because I've got all this mess coming in here. I've got, even if I was going to crimp these on, I have to find or go and buy a special type of top post connector that crimps. Whereas with the side post, I can just use a heavy duty ring connector on there. And I'll show you those later on in the next part of this video. Okay, I can show you a good example of exactly what I was talking about with corrosion going up the wire. We look here where it was in the clamp and it looks pretty good. But then when I pull the wire casing off, get the camera around, uh-oh, that's green inside the wire. So even back about a ½ an inch, the wire's turning green and corroding. So I can peel the rest of this off of here. Yeah, look at that. That is not what you want to see. Now, is that so bad the vehicle's not going to run? No, but that's going to stop you dead in your tracks someday. So we're going to have to strip this wire further back. Luckily enough, I've got plenty of length on this one, so I can take probably about that much off of it. So that's almost 6 inches, 5 inches. So maybe when I get back there, I'll have good wire. The real concern is this wire here, which I can't really make any longer. I mean, I could use a crimp connector and splice it together here, and I might see if I have a crimp connector like that, but I don't think I do. But I can actually look at this wire, and it goes up and over the firewall here and around into that junction block over there. So if I need to, I can replace this whole wire, and that may be what I have to do. Well, this is how you jinx yourself. Earlier I said I hadn't seen corrosion go that far down a wire before, but take a look at that. Green is not good here like it is in nature. And strip it back a little further, but I have a feeling that I'm going to be undoing this wire and replacing the wire down to the starter, which makes me think I'm going to have to replace this whole wire too. So, fun times, but that's why you never ever use these emergency clamps. And you never ever just crimp a connector on the end of a wire like that and not shrink tube it, or at least electrical tape it. Do something to protect it because it will corrode. Okay, on this wire we got a lot more lucky. You can see it's a little corroded, but that's not bad enough to constitute replacement. Now the problem is I should have been smart and just stripped a little bit off of it instead of stripping that much off. I was, a little bit anxious because this wire stripped back so far and was bad. That there is totally fine. We can use that. But the thing is, I wish I hadn't stripped it so far because that's the wire that's already too short. But if I can unpin this a little bit, make a few adjustments in routing, I may just route it down here to give me enough length. And it's not as nice. It's not pinned to the firewall and everything. But it'll work like that just fine for a very long time. And, we can't change the fact that this is an old vehicle. And you have to start questioning how much longer it's really going to be in service for. I mean, this is a Honda. It should run a long time. But, if I can get the wire good for now, we're good. It doesn't have to be pristine showroom floor. This thing's never going into any car shows or anything like that. When you work on older vehicles, you sometimes make strange discoveries. Usually it's change under the seat. Sometimes it's a dead animal in the vehicle. That one really sucks. This one's not so bad, but it's a situation. So here's our cowl. That's what this is called. It's where the air goes into the vehicle. It goes into your air conditioning system and you breathe it while you're driving along. What the hell is this? Well, actually I know what that is, but I have no idea where it came from. The screw was just sitting here on this cowl. From the level of rust, I can see it's been there for a long time. There's nothing, and as you would expect, there's nothing that screws into the hood there. So I don't know how that got there. Maybe it's off the air filter assembly. Here I see a screw kind of like it, but it doesn't have nearly that big a washer on it. So I don't know, maybe somebody was putting in the air filter and didn't put the screw in. I don't know, but free screw. Don't know what it goes to. Hopefully it's not anything important. Okay, So I took this cowl piece loose here so that I could reach back in here and get at the backside and take these clips loose. The way these work is you've got, if it'll focus, see the two little tabs there that you can push in. And so those will push in like that. Can't really do it with my hand, but those push in, you squeeze them. And if you squeeze that from the back side of the hole, it'll pop out and you can get it loose. Same thing with this piece of weather strip. It's got the same types of deals on it. And that's just what holds this cowl down. So I was able to pop that loose and get my wire loosened up here, which is great. And I'll pop that weather strip back on. And it's easy, much easier to install than it is to remove. You just do that, and there you are. So that'll take just a couple of minutes for me to put that back together. And then I can start crimping my positive terminals, and then I'll start working on the negative side. Okay, so this is how you properly crimp a battery terminal. And this isn't just a tool you can pick up anywhere, but the good news is it's really not that expensive online. I think I paid a little under 50 bucks for this. It's really worth it to buy one. And this basically just works like a hydraulic jack. You've got your crimping dies here, and you just pump the handle, and you see the crimping dies get closer and closer together until they finally crimp your connection. And then when you want to release it, you just turn this knob and it retracts back just like a floor jack would. So here's our crimp connection. It's on there to beat hell. It's not going anywhere. What I did is I crimped the two main battery terminals into one connector. That'll kind of reduce corroding and everything, and it'll work better than stacking connectors on the terminal. I really hate doing that. There were some models of GM in the 90s, General Motors vehicles, where they stack the terminals, and anybody who's had any of those vehicles knows that that corrodes like nobody's business. Now there's one more step. We can still see there's a little bit of exposed wire, and that's pretty much going to happen when you crimp a terminal. You can get them pretty well stuffed up in there, but a lot of times they'll squeeze back out just a little bit. There's a solution for that, and it is a special type of shrink tubing. You've got this, which is heat shrinkable tubing. And basically you just heat this up and it shrinks down and fits around wires and really helps a lot corrosion not getting in there. This is actually special heat shrink tubing for battery terminals. It's got glue inside of it, so when you heat it up to shrink it, it not only shrinks around the wires, it glues itself to the wires. Now, one of the big things, normally you always put your heat shrink tubing on before you crimp the terminal because usually it won't fit over the end. This fits right over the end, which makes it really convenient, so I don't have to slip this on first and then be, hold my mouth just right while I'm trying to make the crimp and everything, which, believe me, can be really frustrating. The other thing that'll really make you mad is if you crimp the terminal and you needed to put the shrink tubing on beforehand and you didn't. Now you have to cut the terminal off and start over again. So don't do that. Be sure to always check and make sure about your shrink tubing. So okay, that is what a proper crimp terminal for a battery looks like. Got shrink tubing on it a good ways back. Some might say that's a little too far back, but whenever I have two wires in there, I really like to give it as much length as I can just to keep oxygen out of that connection and try to keep it from corroding. Now the next thing is this does have little add-on connectors on top, which I'm not thrilled with. It's like I was saying earlier, I don't like to stack terminals, but sometimes you have to. So I've got this connection here, and then I've also got this one down here. And what I'd like to do is just pair these together, kind of like I did with these two wires, into one big ring connector. But I noticed something about this wire. By the feel of it, it doesn't feel like a normal wire. And if you feel of a wire like this, and you can feel the case is more spongy on it, and it just kind of like if you look around, it kind of flops. It doesn't act like it's stiff like a normal wire. What I am betting this is, and even without looking at it or looking it up, I can tell you what this is. This is a fusible link. It looks like a wire, but it's not a normal wire. And I noticed that Honda has even added a handy dandy little plug-in here so that you can unplug this little section of wire and replace it. So I'm not going to pin that in along with this wire, bundle them under one connection. What I'm going to do is go ahead and change the terminal on this so that it matches the 3/8 inch size that I need to go into the battery. And then I'm also going to change the terminal on this fusible link so that it matches that 3/8 inch size. And there'll be two separate terminals on top of this terminal. Like I say, I kind of don't like that. It'd be nice to pair these down into one terminal, but since this is a fusible link, it needs to be able to be replaced. And, oh, by the way, I should say what a fusible link is for those who don't know. It's basically a wire that is a fuse. And the reason why we'll use those in place of fuses sometimes is a fuse won't necessarily burn out in some of the situations that a fusible link will burn out, and vice versa. Now, how do you tell when a fusible link is bad? It's kind of almost like a broken bone. You'll come along and you'll feel a section of wire where there's no wire in there. It's just burned away. And you can feel like wire here, nothing, and then wire here, and the casing will just be flexing around like there's nothing in there because it's burned away. But that's what a fusible link will do, is it'll burn up. You always want to be aware of fusible links. You don't want to delete those from the system. That's the same thing as putting too large of a fuse in or deleting a fuse. You can burn down the whole car's electrical system, and I've seen it happen before and had to rewire a whole car because of that. So just don't do that, just for yourself and for everybody else. It's just a bad thing. Okay, so kind of the good thing about this project today is we're getting to show how bad it is to use these emergency clamps long term. I can see here this wire. If we can catch it on camera, see that yellow? It's starting to corrode, and I've already cut about 1.5 inches off of these two. This one looks pretty good, so I'll probably just cut it back, probably about 1/4 inch more will get rid of all of that greenness. But you've got to cut all that corrosion out, because what'll happen is it'll just start corroding the wire next to it. Even if you shrink tube it and do it properly, it's just going to corrode right back up if you leave that corrosion in there. So remember, these are emergency clamps. These are to get you home. If your battery cable busts apart and you're out somewhere, you can buy one of these, tighten it down, and get home. But they're not for long-term use. And it's like I said earlier, I had to learn that the hard way too. So there's a learning curve on everything, but just don't use those. Buy you a good crimper, buy you a set of crimp terminals, and you can get these in all different sizes, and they're relatively cheap. And it just saves you a lot of time and frustration. You can do your own battery terminals and make it the way you want it instead of somebody else's idea of how long your battery cable needed to be. And you're wrapping the battery cable around and around under the hood, and it's just not good. So this is definitely the way to do things if you can. Okay, I had to have a little bit of a rethink on this connector that had a fusible link. What I did is I went ahead and cut a new piece of wire and connected it down to the other two wires that were down here that were connected together before, and put it all under one ring connector. Now it's all connected to the battery. We're good to go there. As far as this fusible link is concerned, I wish I had a single pin connector like this to just put on the end of this wire, and then it would just be unpluggable, and then you'd still have to put a new connector on this end of the fusible link when you got a new one. Now, looking at this wire, you can see, if it'll focus on the wire, which it won't, that is not just regular copper. It's a different color than what you'd expect out of a regular wire, and so that definitely is a fusible link. But there is another way I can connect this. It's a little bit more permanent than I would like, but then again, you really don't change those fusible links that often. It was nice of Honda to put that connector on there, but most of the times you'll just see those directly hardwired into a vehicle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little deal here. And what this is, you probably know, but if you don't, this is a crimp butt connector, meaning I butt the two wires together against each other, kind of sort of like this, inside this little crimp connector, and then I crimp it down on there and it holds on. But the problem is with these, a lot of times they come with this little plastic sleeve on them, and it's supposed to act as a shielding, but it really doesn't shield anything, and it lets moisture all down in there, and you end up with the same situation we are trying to correct here, which is a bunch of corroded wires. So what you do is, whenever you have one of these, you take your knife and you carefully cut this piece of plastic off to where you've just got the metal connector. Then you use that metal connector to crimp and use some shrink tubing on it, and then you're sealed up and good to go. And there's the end product. That doesn't make the best connection ever, but it's a good semi-permanent connection, and it can last a really long time like that. So that's a way you can splice wires and keep them dry inside. The shrink tubing's down on here tight. That'll work just fine for a long, long time. So that basically finishes up the positive side. Now I got to do the negative side, which will actually be a lot quicker, because really all I got to worry about is these two wires, and then this short little ground here. I'm just going to completely replace that wire because I know it's got to be bad. So I couldn't resist. I inspected this ground wire that I replaced, and it's actually pretty good. The battery end here is not really corroded at all. I stripped it back pretty far. There's not corrosion going down the wire. And then even this end where I was complaining about they didn't get the wire casing all the way up and they didn't shrink tube it, it actually looks pretty good when I look at it. I mean, yeah, the wire's real dirty there where it wasn't covered up. But if we look at the wire just back from that, it's nice, shiny, good copper. But I still have to say, I really don't like when somebody crimps a connection on like that and doesn't get the wire casing up to the end of the connector, or put some shrink tubing on there or something. It just, that's unprofessional looking. Look at that. I mean, that looks like somebody did it who didn't give a flying hoot in hell how long the vehicle ran or what their work looked like. I mean, that just looks wrong when you look at it. The wire kinked around like that and all hanging out and everything. I just don't think that's good work, and that's why I replaced it. So to be fair, I wanted to take a minute and stop and talk about why a lot of people really do hate side posts. And there's actually a good reason. This is what manufacturers used to do back in the day. And yes, I know I've got a negative and a positive here. Don't pay attention to that. Pretend they're both positive. So pretend both of these are red. And what they would do is they would stack the positive terminal. Now you saw earlier I did that, but I did it under one connector, not two connectors stacked like this. What they would do is they would use a longer bolt like this, and it would go in, and there would actually be a little metal spacer in here. And all that did is just set this whole thing up for massive, massive corrosion. And these would corrode like crazy. The other problem with them is you got this little bitty hex head here on the end of it. Your hex head's not here, it's actually right out here on the end. And so you have to get a little tiny wrench on there and try to tighten this thing down enough to actually make it hold and not corrode and not flop around on there like it is right now. That was impossible. You'd never get these tight enough, and there was no way to really get them tight enough. The way they were insulated was inadequate. And invariably, you'd end up stripping this nut sooner or later. When there was just one terminal stacked, it'd be a little short screw like this, but you'd still have that little terminal screw on there. And I guess this little ridge here was supposed to be for you to hook jumper cables onto, but you're not getting a pair of jumper cables on that good enough to start a vehicle. So these would corrode. They're really bad. If I can take this loose, just let the positive wire drop to the floor here because we're really not doing anything. But the problem is you look at these and it's got that recession in there, and there's this little pocket down in here. And oxygen would get it all in there. You couldn't even really spray terminal protector in there. And this whole thing would just corrode down the end, and it would corrode so bad it'd start going down the wire. Even though this is a fairly substantial, bonded on connection, that's not shrink tubing, that's basically rubber that's been melted over the wire. One of the things I have done with this style of GM terminal before is take a razor knife and just cut the whole end of it off down to where this is bare metal. Then, I can coat it with something so that it won't corrode as quickly. And then also I can just use a regular bolt in there, like the ones on the van you saw where they're bolted in with a big 3/8 bolt. That you can tighten down. You can get a wrench on there. You can get your jumper cables on there if you need to. And you don't have to deal with this mess, because this is literally agony every time you pull it loose and put it on. So these, I always tell people, junk them, get proper connectors. Do just a regular ring style connector like I did on that van, and you'll be fine. This This is a bad memory right here. So these definitely are not good. Okay, now we've got the negative battery cable made up, a brand new ground here. I'll bolt everything in and we'll see how it looks when I'm done. All right, so there it is, fully installed. Now we've got good, clean shrink tube terminals. The original battery bracket even fits in, and that should work a long time with no problems. Now the other reason I did switch this over to side post battery terminals is this isn't even this car's battery. Right now I'm playing musical batteries between cars. I only have like about 3 good batteries, and I have a lot more cars than that. So it's really convenient for me to be able to just swap any battery into anything else. And it's not going to hurt anything having a little bit bigger battery in the car. It'll work just fine like that. It'll just start easier. So that's a wrap on that modification. I still like the side post. I can still get clamps on these to jump start if I need to. Really, yet again, not that important. I made this ground a lot nicer. You can see that shrink tubed over, and it curls down and around to give you room to work when you pull the terminals loose and everything. So should be a lot better of a setup, and it should work trouble-free for a really long time.